Even before Pearl Harbor plunged the United States into conflict, World War II had been going on in Europe for over 2 years. The Germans had already conquered France, the Low Countries, Norway, and Denmark, and consolidated power in Western Europe. Hitler's victorious armies, now perched on the bluffs above the English Channel, looked across to their next intended victim, Britain. But it was not to be. Outnumbered, but not outflown, RAF pilots turned back the Luftwaffe and won the Battle of Britain, convincing Hitler that an invasion was not feasible. Winston Churchill may have argued for the Allies knifing into what he called the soft underbelly of Europe, but Franklin Roosevelt saw no substitute for invading France, gaining a toehold on the continent and liberating all of Europe. The Americans who stormed Hitler's Fortress Europe on 6 June 1944 were predominantly troops of the U.S. Army. However, it was U.S. Navy ships that carried the soldiers and their equipment from England, and U.S. Navy battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and rocket-firing amphibious assault vessels that pounded German fortifications and cleared the way to the beaches and beyond. And too, there would be Navy personnel on the Normandy shore. These were the men of the 2nd, 6th, and 7th Naval Beach Battalions, units whose mission it was to bridge the gap between sea and land and perform many functions on the invasion beaches. The caregivers, the physicians, hospital corpsmen, and medics would have to contend with every wound modern warfare could produce: high-velocity small arms and artillery fire, penetrating wounds of the head, face, neck, and extremities, fractures, burns, and blast injuries. The liberators would also face a well-equipped, experienced, and entrenched enemy whose reputation for invincibility had become legendary. By spring of 1944, preparations for the cross-channel invasion, designated Overlord, were in full swing. 1.5 million American troops, augmented by forces from Britain, Canada, other Commonwealth nations, and token forces of Free French, Free Poles, and troops from other occupied nations, prepared for the greatest amphibious landing in history. The flotilla that would take them and their equipment to the continent numbered over 1,300 warships, 1,600 merchant vessels, and 4,000 landing ships. The highly trained sailors of the beach battalions were to establish all shore-to-ship communications, clear and mark sea lanes for landing craft, repair small boats, and treat and evacuate casualties.
The Naval Beach Battalion was a group of experts in the field of bringing men and supplies into the beach and other supplies, and also the evacuation of the sick, the wounded, the prisoners, and the dead. It was composed of activities that would take our work from the sea up to the high water mark on the beach.
Hello, I'm Jan Herman, historian of the Navy Medical Department. And this is Dr. Lee Parker of the 6th Naval Beach Battalion that landed here on Omaha Beach on D-Day, June 6, 1944. No one had any illusions. Landing on the French coast would not be a cakewalk. German artillery and machine guns in well-protected positions covered almost every yard of beach, and they would exact a heavy toll.
Jan, let me show you something. My beach, I landed on Easy Red. My beach of assignment was Fox Red, which was extremely, from looking at the beach, extreme left. You had Fox Red, Fox Green, Easy Red, and Easy Green. But I had to cross that several beaches to get to my place. Each man carried a packet with a small battle dressing on it, along with some sulfur drug and some tablets. The morphine was supplied in little small spirettes that was made out of a material kind of like toothpaste. They had a needle in the end of it with a sterile slip cover over that needle. You simply pulled that cover off, jammed it in through clothing or anything else, and mashed it. and then you put an M on the forehead of the individual that got it.
Physicians would provide rudimentary care where possible. Hospital corpsmen, armed with litters, medical kits, and just about every medical supply they could carry, were to administer first aid, a battle dressing, a tourniquet, a morphine injection, a casualty tag, and then move the wounded down to the water's edge so they could be evacuated aboard the now empty landing craft heading back out to the transports. The Navy would also be responsible for returning casualties from Normandy to England. Once evacuated from the American sectors of Utah and Omaha beaches, the wounded would be transferred to specially equipped LCTs and LSTs, staffed by physicians and hospital corpsmen. Here, they would receive emergency treatment. 2 Navy physicians, 1 Army surgeon, 2 Army operating room technicians, and 40 Navy hospital corpsmen staffed these versatile ships. Once safely back in England, Navy medical personnel, including nurses, were to triage, conduct emergency surgery, and stabilize the injured until they could be evacuated to other hospitals in Britain or back to the United States for more definitive treatment.
By spring 1944, the 6th Naval Beach Battalion had already arrived in southern England, making the town of Salcombe its headquarters. While there, Navy medical personnel continued to hone the skills they learned back in the States. They studied the Hospital Corps Handbook and practiced first aid on simulated wounds. Nevertheless, their medical training was rudimentary. Acquiring military skills for the actual landing took precedence.
Most of our training was exactly the same as everybody else. I remember when I first went in, they were giving us guns and weapons and mines and booby trap school, demolition school. I said, hey, I'm a medic, I don't do this stuff. You went and you learned everything. And we carried a gun up until the day before we landed in Normandy. That's when all the medics gave up their weapons.
And we actually were taught to drive bulldozers and dig trenches. And we had inspection by the Army to inspect our firearms, which they thought was disgraceful. They had to bring in a bunch of ordnance people to correct all of our guns. None of the Navy people cleaned the rifle, I don't think, ever. Some of them, they couldn't even see through the barrel, but they straightened that out. We went to a lot of meetings with the line officers, and they were very informative. And we had sand table models that were excellent to show you exactly where you were going, what you were going to do. And we're told very emphatically that you were going to have to make up your own mind. There was nobody going to be there to tell you what to do. When you got there, you had to do it. And that was their instructions.
To the casual observer, these sailors seemed indistinguishable from soldiers. What would identify them was the painted gray band, a stenciled USN, and a painted red arc.
I always tell when an Army man was walking down the company street or when a sailor was coming. They were dressed alike. The sailor had a peculiar swagger to his gait, and it was one that we knew who we were, where we were going, and what we were going to do, because we were very, very highly trained and very proud of our services.
If preparations were meticulous for the greatest amphibious operation in history,
training was completed. Loaded on board 7,000 vessels. The enemy clueless.
You know, we left the night of the 4th and got well out into the channel and were ordered to turn around because the weather was just too rough. And I remembered thinking, good Lord have mercy. Those LCIs and LCTs that are going to cross in this weather, and here we're on a 25,000-ton transport that's rocking and rolling and pitching and bouncing. What in the world are those poor guys going through?
The best-kept secret in the history of warfare was put on hold because of rough weather.
When weather forecasters assured him things would improve, Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower said, "Okay, we'll go." And the Armada got underway.
By dusk, LSTs, LCTs, LCIs, and every troop transport was out in the channel, escorted by minesweepers and destroyers. At Southampton, Navy Base Hospital No. 12, Nurse Helen Pavlovsky and her colleagues knew something was up.
The next morning, the harbor was empty. Not one ship was in sight. We were there for the invasion casualties. It's what we had been preparing for. And now we were ready.
So on June 5th, before dawn, we again started out leading this long procession with a minesweeper on each side, and started out down the English coast, and then we turned south, and we knew then where we were going.
Dr. Groom's LST led a long procession of vessels. Some came from Portsmouth, others from Southampton. The remainder departed from a half-dozen other channel ports. All were at general quarters and expecting to be attacked either by submarines, German torpedo boats, or the Luftwaffe. But the element of surprise was complete, and opposition from air and sea did not materialize. Members of the 6th Naval Beach Battalion occupied several vessels for the crossing.
Aboard the Dorothy Dix, I was able to get up into Flying Bridge going across, and it was very enlightening. As far as you could see in front of you, to the right of you, to your left, to the back, with nothing but ships.
We were quite nervous, but your biggest battle was not to look nervous so the other fellows wouldn't think you were scared. You were more afraid of being scared than anything else.
Some chose to spend those hours in contemplation above decks. Others whiled away the time playing cards or contemplating their fate.
We did everything we could to keep our minds occupied. Mostly it was watching crap games. And it was very interesting because they were using American dollars, English money, and French invasion money. And you'd be surprised how quickly people adapted to the exchange system in a matter of minutes when they had a great personal interest in it.
We were playing poker, and when I saw I had 5 aces, I knew it was time for me to give up and go and lay in the sack.
And then we had our traditional breakfast, I think about 2 o'clock in the morning, of steak and eggs.
If they possibly can do it, the Navy wants everybody to take a shower so they're clean in case they get hurt. And they want to feed you a real nice breakfast, usually steak and eggs. And I said that was the best steak and eggs I ever ate in my life. And Dr. Borden said, steak and eggs? He said, I got cold salami and bread and a glass of milk.
When the first light of dawn lit the Normandy coast, soldiers and sailors gazed upon that threatening stretch of shoreline and wondered what lay ahead.
On the bluffs above Omaha Beach, German soldiers peered astounded through their binoculars. Closing in on the shore was a sight equally frightening and awe-inspiring. Ships too numerous to count extended to the far horizon. As the range closed, the pre-landing bombardment began, with the battleship Texas and cruiser Augusta opening up with their big guns. They were joined by destroyers and rocket-firing amphibious assault vessels that pounded German fortifications. The enemy may well have sensed they were in for a losing battle.
The Allies were ready. The timing was right. H-hour was at 0630.
I heard the bombardment and saw the flashes and heard first the bombers coming over for the pre-bombardment.
We had a ringside seat to a great spectacle. I understood that the Allied air forces had promised 10,000 sorties over that invasion beach, and I don't know how many they had, but they certainly bombed it. It was a flame for as far as you could see in either direction.
When the bombardment stopped, the first wave went into Omaha Beach, quickly discovering that aerial bombing and shore bombardment had not done the job.
That's when the skipper called down, he said, "Okay, boys, this is it. Here we go. Give me flank speed, or full speed." So in we went. And I could feel everything, every shudder on the ship when a shell hit us.
Going in, being scared, nauseated, seasick, and everything else, there was a lot of vomiting going on. It was a mess. You can imagine they were vomiting in the helmets, in the corners, anything else.
When we got near the shore, all you could see was the bluff and this tremendous haze of smoke over the beach and hearing gunfire.
Anyhow, it became more and more chaotic. The odor completely changed from just pure cordite in the I can smell it now, into a mixture of burning marsh, burning bodies, just like when you drop a wool blanket in a burning trash can, same odor.
Omaha Beach was pandemonium, a butcher's hell of exploding shells, dismembered men, burning landing craft. The casualties in this sector were absolutely appalling.
And we took a armor-piercing shell right through the hawse pipe. That's the big hole where the anchor goes through, right on the bow. That acted like shrapnel. That killed 3 of our guys, and flying bridge up there was all covered with condensed milk, K and C rations, blood, and body parts. Flesh splattered and stuck. And I had this fire hose going, and I was crying. And I'm not ashamed to say it. But there were parts of human beings that I was just flushing off the deck like it was trash.
And we couldn't get in. They couldn't find enough room to get this large craft through the obstacle area, and we were just cruising back and forth offshore. And then a command boat came along and yelled, "What unit?" And we said, 6th Beach, and they said, "Follow us." And they found a spot that we could go in. But I don't think you could get all the way in because they dumped us in about 5 feet of water, which I really enjoyed. Because as soon as you hit that ramp, in the beach battalion you were taught, when you get off a ramp, be on the side and shoot this way because all the fire is going down the mouth of the ramp. And I got stuck right in the middle. So as soon as I went in, I went right to the bottom and stayed down there as long as I could. And when I came up, and you could see the bullets zipping through the water. So as soon as I stopped seeing them, I went back up, and they were sweeping further down the beach. But fellows on each side of me were hit, and by the time I got them ashore, they were both dead.
When the ramp went down, we weren't waiting now because the machine gun fire had zeroed in on the, you could see it coming off the water.
The very moment that that ramp went down, there was one, I would say, large explosion right up near the bow of the boat. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm glad I was not up at the bow of the boat. And that's where that Army major that I told you about earlier had his arm blown off. I saw him waving what looked like a white baton or stick. And it turned out what he was waving was the humerus all the way from the shoulder to the elbow, just a white bone. That's what he was waving. He didn't know what had happened to him. He was too stunned to know what had happened to him. So an Army medic and I went over to him and applied a tourniquet to his left arm.
So they were just sort of quiet, not yells, not take it easy, not that at all, but just see you, take care. And I remember my just muttering to myself, God, please help me, do it well.
Oh, yes. I remember when we landed, I said, "Dear Lord, let me live to be 20, because my birthday was on the 29th, and we landed on the 6th.
Everywhere were the dead, the dying, and the wounded. Plenty of business for the medical personnel of the 6th and 7th Naval Beach Battalions.
The thing that was amazing as far as our getting to the beach was that we were told that we would have so many foxholes and bomb craters that we could jump in. Well, I never did see a single one. They missed that beach.
We started getting hit with the 88s and machine gun bullet. And one of my best friends, Claire Mason, had got hit in the left arm, and boy, it was a bad one. So I took off a belt, and I put a hard tourniquet on it, on his arm, around his muscle part there, and tightened it as far as I could. And I told him, I says, hang right on to this here, because I got to leave. So I left him, said goodbye to him, and left. I ran off the starboard ramp. It was partly blown off.
It's weird walking down the beach and listening to these 88s go over you. They say you don't hear the one that gets you, but I heard a lot of them.
I was at the back of the stretcher. I dove to the right. Rick dove to the left. No question about it, the most high-pitched, loudest noise I have ever heard in my life. I said, Rick, let's move it. He didn't move. Still didn't dawn on me. You know, here's his brain in his helmet. This boy's dead. You know, he doesn't need me anymore. I sprung up. I had never cursed in my life. Never. Not a F, not a D. And I looked at the hillside, which was very smoky, dark green, and I screamed out with tears streaming, God damn you, everyone.
While the infantry, supported by naval gunfire, gradually silenced the German strong points, Beach Battalion doctors and corpsmen stabilized patients in hastily thrown together aid stations beneath the bluffs.
It was right at the high tide mark, still on the sand. There were 4 Red Crosses flags on stakes that were driven into the sand. The sand was still wet. And I thought, well, this is a good place for me to start. I don't know who they are. I found out that it was an Army aid team, all Army medics and an Army doctor.
One of the big things was to determine whether they were dead or not. A lot of them were in shock. Drowning was the biggest cause of death as far as I was concerned.
Use my knife, get through the pant leg or whatever. Dust it with 2 or 3 packets of sulfur powder. Jam them with morphine, fill out the tag, get them on a ship, get them offshore. It was my job.
One particular casualty, he was right at the end of there, and he kept asking for help, and there was no help you could give him. In other words, it was it.
Complicating their job was the loss of medical supplies being brought ashore by landing craft.
The ability to use your talents, there was not much use of that. You had a pair of scissors if you were going to do an amputation, that was it.
And here I am with all these guys. I'm left with no medical equipment or supplies of any kind, not even morphine syrettes, thank you. No bandages, no nothing. And I'm looking after them. I don't know what I was supposed to do, but I stayed with them.
I think that a lot of these pharmacists, mates, and corpsmen that were with us hadn't been around too many bodies. I mean, this is something that you're not thrown with 200 or 300 dead people at one time and like it.
Along about daybreak, we had the first opportunity to see what we were doing and take these litter cases down to wherever the waterfront happened to be, you know, the tidal front right at that moment, and try to get them aboard landing craft that were coming in. We had to wait while the landing craft came in and it unloaded, and there's still mortar fire going on, but no more small arms fire.
Basically, I spent D-Day doing, as long as it was daylight, was moving casualties into any vehicle that was unloading. You know, usually at anything unloading, there's a seaman or something up at the bow to help folks get off. And I was saying, hang on just for one more. He's just right over here, just one more.
Meanwhile, LSTs hovering offshore out of range received the casualties. Doctors who stayed aboard LSTs and treated casualties evacuated from the beach were better equipped, but were no less hampered by cramped facilities.
I had an operating room, which was the officer's ward room. It was equipped for amputations and that sort of things. And I was reluctant to make the decision to amputate a leg or an arm if I thought there was any remote possibility of the man being able to regain it. Our job was simply one of maintaining life support and getting them back in the best shape we could to deliver them to the ambulances ashore. And that's what we did.
It was just a horrible thing to experience, but also the need to take care of them superseded anything else. So we worked hard. There were large numbers of casualties coming in. We worked. Nobody even thought about stopping to eat or rest. Rest was allotted by order after several days. Food was brought into the operating room theater so that when we had a chance, we'd grab a bite to eat. Everybody was busy, and everybody wanted to be busy as long as there was work to do. No one wanted to stop. So finally, they had to order us to bed.
On D+1, the two beach battalions assigned to Omaha Beach, the 6th and 7th, were well established, and the chain of evacuation from shore to sea was functioning according to plan. 3 days later, Army transports taking off from hastily constructed strips atop the bluffs began evacuating wounded by air. 17 days after the initial landings at Normandy, the casualty evacuation system was working so smoothly that the naval beach battalions returned to England.
Each one of us has a little phase of this whole story, and it's going to be completely a different type of a sensation. You never see the whole picture. You don't even see a fraction of the picture. All you see is your picture.
It's bad to see a 17-year-old come up with a loss of a leg, loss of an arm, certainly loss of life. War is hell. It's not to be glorified in any way. And I think the more that we can stress that point to people, that it's most important.
We didn't do anything that we were not supposed to do. We did what we had to do.
Except for being so everlastingly grateful for having lived through it. I'll never forget the fact that there were so many of the guys in my outfit that didn't have that much good fortune.
There on that wall I saw the name of my good chief and some of my men. And I must say I was proud to have worked with them and known men like that that gave their lives that others might survive.
You wake up and start thinking. And you wonder why you survived. Because so many very good guys left.
I've been a family physician for 45 years. I've delivered 2,000 babies. I'll borrow from Churchill now. D-Day was the greatest moment of my life.
Dr. Parker, let's go visit some old friends.
Battalions were to establish all shore-to-ship communications, clear and mark sea lanes for landing craft, repair small boats, and treat and evacuate casualties.
The Naval Beach Battalion was a group of experts in the field of bringing men and supplies into the beach and other supplies, and also the evacuation of the sick, the wounded, the prisoners, and the dead. It was composed of activities that would take our work from the sea up to the high water mark on the beach.
Hello, I'm Jan Herman, historian of the Navy Medical Department. And this is Dr. Lee Parker of the 6th Naval Beach Battalion that landed here on Omaha Beach on D-Day, June 6, 1944. No one had any illusions. Landing on the French coast would not be a cakewalk. German artillery and
substitute for invading France, gaining a toehold on the continent and liberating all of Europe. The Americans who stormed Hitler's Fortress Europe on 6 June 1944 were predominantly troops of the U.S. Army. However, it was U.S. Navy ships that carried the soldiers and their equipment from England. And U.S. Navy battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and rocket-firing amphibious assault vessels that pounded German fortifications and cleared the way to the beaches and beyond. And, too, there would be Navy personnel on the Normandy shore. These were the men of the 2nd, 6th, and 7th Naval Beach Battalions, units whose mission it was to bridge the gap between sea and land and perform many functions on the invasion beaches. The caregivers, the physicians, hospital corpsmen, and medics would have to contend with every wound modern warfare could produce, high-velocity small arms and artillery fire, penetrating wounds of the head, face, neck, and extremities, fractures, burns, and blast injuries. The liberators would also face a well-equipped, experienced, and entrenched enemy whose reputation for invincibility had become legendary. By spring of 1944, preparations for the cross-channel invasion, designated Overlord, were in full swing. 1.5 million American troops, augmented by forces from Britain, Canada, other Commonwealth nations, and token forces of Free French, Free Poles, and troops from other occupied nations, prepared for the greatest amphibious landing in history. The flotilla that would take them and their equipment to the continent numbered over 1,300 warships, 1,600 merchant vessels, and 4,000 landing ships. The highly trained sailors of the Beach Battalion even before Pearl Harbor plunged the United States into conflict, World War II had been going on in Europe for over 2 years. The Germans had already conquered France, the Low Countries, Norway, and Denmark, and consolidated power in Western Europe. Hitler's victorious armies, now perched on the bluffs above the English Channel, looked across to their next intended victim, Britain. But it was not to be. Outnumbered, but not outflown, RAF pilots turned back the Luftwaffe and won the Battle of Britain, convincing Hitler that an invasion was not feasible. Winston Churchill may have argued for the Allies knifing into what he called the soft underbelly of Europe, but Franklin Roosevelt saw no
machine guns in well-protected positions covered almost every yard of beach, and they would exact a heavy toll.
Jan, let me show you something. My beach, I landed on Easy Red. My beach of assignment was Fox Red, which was extremely, from looking at the beach, extreme left. You had Fox Red, Fox Green, Easy Red, and Easy Green. But I had to cross that several beaches to get to my place. Each man carried a packet with a small battle dressing on it, along with some sulfur drug and some tablets. The morphine was supplied in little small spirettes that was made out of a material kind of like toothpaste. They had a needle in the end of it with a sterile slip cover over that needle. You simply pulled that cover off, jammed it in through clothing or anything else, and mashed it.